Hello, everyone, and welcome back for my next episode of Healthy Rebel Speaks Out. And I am so excited today because we have an amazing guest who is going to talk about everything hormone, longevity, belly fat that you are just dying to know. So strap in. Dr. Rajka is a leading functional medicine MD, an award-winning speaker, and the best author. That's right, I do have the book. Energized, feeling fantastic forever, as well as an expert in all things hormone replacement therapy, longevity, and nutrigenetics. And she has helped thousands of busy professional women reclaim the energy of their youth and ditch their midlife symptoms that traditional doctors have told them are a normal part of aging. But now they can live longer and stronger. And her work has earned the respect of her peers as the reputation as the go-to doctor. And she consults with patients at Simply Health Institute, the clinic she has founded and outside of Chicago. Well, welcome.
What a lovely introduction, Bonnie. I'm super excited to share my 3D protocol, which I wrote about in the book, as you've just now disclosed, and really dispel some of the myths that I think are hindering women's health and how well they feel as they age, particularly over the age of 40.
Yes, well, we both can understand that. But before we dive into some of the topics, I'm just curious just a little bit about what has made you personally so passionate about this topic and kind of spreading the word.
So a lot of us in the field have our own journeys. When I was a little girl, I knew from the age of 5, I had several dreams. One was the dream of becoming a doctor, the dream of getting married and having my own children, and the dream, when I became that doctor, of curing just about everyone. And with my health struggles that spanned a couple decades, I almost didn't actualize these dreams. And when I eventually went on to be that doctor, I felt like I wasn't curing anyone. And when I went through all of my symptoms, the common thread from fatigue to endometriosis to infertility to vision losing migraines, PMS, midlife weight gain, and then a mysterious autoimmune disease that really was triggered by a hormone that was synthetic, believe it or not, that put my liver into a tailspin. That almost took me out or would have rendered me on steroids. So it was a moment I'll never ever forget. We were on a celebratory trip with our children, and they were really young at the time, and I should have been celebrating that I was the doctor, celebrating that after all these years of infertility, I was blessed with 2 beautiful children. And all I could think of in that moment was, I might leave these children without a mommy. And I had just started down the functional medicine path. And I said, and I made that commitment to myself that I'm not going to let this happen. And I sought the input from a colleague who was well versed in the field because I just started training it. And with his help, overcame all of those. I never ended up on steroids. I was never given the official diagnosis of that 4th or 5th autoimmune disease. And the common thread was hormone imbalances, which led to all my symptoms. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners can maybe relate to some of those.
Yeah, well, what a personal, passionate story. I appreciate that. I, of course, am curious. There is a big difference between, the synthetic hormone replacements, such as people get quite frequently in birth control pills, and some of those issues compared to what you are now an expert in.
Absolutely. There is a huge difference. So bioidentical, for your listeners, are mimics what we naturally produce. A lot of what is dispensed through your conventional doctor, not all, they do use some bioidentical, is synthetic. And definitely the birth control pills are all synthetic. And there indeed was one that's what was the trigger. So it wasn't the whole cause. And it really had to do with my genetic makeup, which I'm so passionate about, that didn't allow me to break it down. That was that trigger that led to my immune system going haywire and all the symptoms that ensued.
Well, great, because this leads me to my first question, because I get so many women that come into my practice that will ask me about hormones. And I have been taking them, I'm very supportive of it, but I always say yes, no, and maybe, because I do believe you need to go to an expert and that there is a big genetic component to all of this. So maybe you could talk about that importance, the genetics and metabolism, and then of course, the hormones.
Yeah, so where to begin and unpack this? But I'd say the very first thing that people need to realize, and what you just alluded to, is that there needs to be a conversation between you and a doctor that is well versed in prescribing bioidentical hormones, because there was a study released in early 2000, the Women's Health Initiative, that really did, in my humble opinion, a disservice to women. All women were stripped off hormones, and I was just a few years into practice and unfortunately lost out on the benefits. And if you look at the data, since women were taken off hormones largely, the incidence of breast cancer has only increased. And in that study, even using synthetic estrogen, that did not increase your risk of breast cancer. So it's not the preferred form. So it's to have that conversation, to let go of this some kind of preconceived notion that hormones are bad or all hormones are bad, and put it into context with where you are now. I've heard all kinds of stories that people are afraid. I'm like, well, you don't know until you look at all. What are the benefits? What are your risks? What is your underlying status of how you break down hormones, and what your diet's like, what your digestion is like? And that's part of my 3D process, because the worst thing you can do is just put someone on hormones. So that oftentimes backfires, especially if you're not paying attention to how they're broken down. And so I'd say have the conversation. Don't be afraid. Listen to the pros and the cons. And the third thing I'll hear is, oh, well, wasn't it intended that we lose this hormonal input? That might be, but I'll tell you, like you, I'm a proponent of them. And for my personal reasons, I'm on them, and I'm looking at living longer and stronger. And it's really not about living longer. We are living longer. Now, our children may not be. They're predicted to live shorter, but if we're going to live longer, I'm seeing a whole world of hurt ever since I've been in practice for my 65 plus crowd that have come in saying, Doc, these golden years aren't so golden. And back then I didn't know functional medicine, and now I do. I'm like, you want to be well versed, because you don't want to be that person that can't get up off their couch when you're 60, 70, 80. I've seen that happen. And it's not a scare tactic. You don't want to be spending the wealth you've accumulated in, and should be for your retirement, on your health. So it's really knowing the pros and cons and making a collaborative decision with your healthcare provider.
Yes, well, you hit the nail on the head. I mean, coming from a background of working in long-term healthcare for a decade, I think we shared the vision of enjoying more of your years engaging in the activities that bring you joy. I mean, isn't that it? Not just, adding numbers, right? Actually, I would like to back up just for a second here, because I really want to get your overview, because you have created this special 3D protocol. So I would like to hear about it. And this is what you, of course, dive into in your book if other people are listening and they are more interested in learning more about it.
Yeah, I developed it after a decade of being into functional medicine. I utilized it all along, but had no idea. Then I said, well, what are the steps that I take that had people flying to see me as soon as they lifted the shelter in place? I was just absolutely stunned. Like, why are people flying to see me when there's adequate providers everywhere? And even my colleagues in functional medicine who know the field of functional medicine come and consult with me for their personal needs. So very humbled and flattered. I said, well, let's do a deeper dive. And if you start with step 1, which is diet and nutrients, you'll optimize step 2, which will optimize step 3. But if you start at step 3, so step 3 is detoxification. Let's start there. Like, pretend that you don't know there's a sequential order, and you put someone on some sort of detox, whether it's a fad juice cleanse, which I'm not terribly a fan of. I love that it puts people in an alkaline state, but a juice cleanse doesn't provide people with the right amount of protein. And they break down products of protein that allow us to detox. And all of a sudden, we store our toxins in our fat. So you're dropping weight, you're releasing these toxins in the bloodstream. They're broken down into an even more toxic chemical. It's a breakdown product. We call metabolite. I know that's a fancy word. And if it doesn't get cleared, it makes you feel sicker. So that's why even sometimes a whole food diet, as people transition from completely processed, they may feel it a little bit, but if you do it in the right order. So I back it up and I say, what do we need to do to nourish our bodies? Even in functional medicine, I'd say let's start with that first D. We can get caught up in eliminating things. I think that's a great strategy for the short term, and then figuring out how to reintroduce. And I've learned through genetics how to reintroduce things. So you don't even have to know your genetics. You can teach your body how much of those proteins they need, how much carbs, how much fats, and huge proponent of fueling protein. It's probably the number one thing that women and men across the board don't eat enough of. And so we're talking about at least 100 grams a day for every adult, and if not closer to a full gram per pound of ideal body weight. So you start there. So you have the breakdown products available. You're nourishing the body for the vital vitamins and minerals to be able to clear all these things you're exposed to. It could be just carb pollution, for goodness sakes. It could be the weed killer your neighbor sprays. It could be the plastics out of those plastic water bottles that people drank out of, and hopefully by now no one is utilizing. But so that really is the stepping stone, is to start there. And there are, I've created this whole method around eating, but I also say that nutrient part is that even if you ate a whole foods organic diet, our soil is so vitamin and mineral deficient. It's been over-farmed. Back in the 1930s, the Senate warned the American public and said all adults should be taking a multivitamin and mineral because our soil is depleted. And we see this time and time again. And how I've seen it is I've measured people's nutrient levels. Remember, that's vitamins and minerals for 10 years. Early on, it was most adults were deficient in about 3 to 5, and everyone knows probably the top one is vitamin D, probably followed by magnesium and zinc. Now it's about 5 to 7, and the younger the person, so with each decade, you can add several. And under 20, I'm seeing 10, 15, 20 deficiencies because people simply aren't eating whole foods. The younger they are, they're relying on fast foods, et cetera. So that's why that first step is so crucial.
Yeah, I think you bring a really important topic because a lot of people are not aware. And then that even eating a perfectly, rounded diet is just simply impossible in our modern world to get all of the nutrients that we need. And then you think about the young kids or people that are on, unfortunately, I would say some of these more radical diets where they're actually eliminating some of the important food groups.
Yes, yes, yes. And I'd love to share a case study. So
Yes,
this
please.
I had a woman in her young 20s. She came to see me because she and her girlfriend were trying to get pregnant at the same time. Her girlfriend had seen a functional medicine practitioner in the state that she lived in, and she encouraged her to see one herself because she found great value. So even in the first appointment, she says, I don't even know why I'm here. I feel good. I don't have any issues. And I even thought about canceling this appointment. And in the first appointment, we did her labs. And in the second one, we found she had 17 vitamin and mineral deficiencies. And on paper, it looked as if she ate relatively healthy. Her exercise, she was one of these people that was well balanced between cardio and strength training, which is unusual. People either don't exercise or they're heavy into the cardio, which is the wrong, both are wrong. And we can get into that later. And she had fatty liver. Her liver enzymes were they were 5 times normal. And she had no symptoms. Now, fatty liver is a condition that is not related to the intake of alcohol. It is, in my humble opinion, eating too high of carbs with not enough vitamins and mineral to break down the toxins. So you're putting this huge burden on the liver. And when you clean up the foods and fuel the body and you provide the right vitamins and minerals, it went away. In her, we reversed those numbers in 6 weeks. And the sad statistic is that 20% of fatty liver goes on to cirrhosis and liver failure. So you don't want to be in that 20%.
Wow.
And she had no idea, and she felt fantastic. And so she comes in and we walked her through the 3D protocol. And this is how I crafted it. It was really based on what do I need to run someone who's healthy through to get them even healthier. And she says, boy, I didn't realize I could feel this fantastic. And that was a 20-something-year-old who had no symptoms. So
That is an amazing story. Thank you for sharing, but it really speaks to getting ahead of things before you feel it and when people should test. So we were actually talking about this a little bit before we started taping today about, you know, the best time to get on your health is when you are feeling good. But I mean, what is your opinion of like just, you know, the basic lab tests and where they fall short that most patients come to me with? Your basic, you know, CMP, which for people who don't know, it's the one that your doctor, the standard test that your doctor will take. And what is missing that people should get? What do you think are the most essential things people should ask?
yeah. So as you said, the complete metabolic panel is one thing. And it's not only that they're ordering a very narrow panel. So you usually get your metabolic panel, a full blood count, maybe if you're lucky, a TSH, which is only one thyroid hormone marker, and then maybe a vitamin D. And it's sad, in the last 4 years, if we learned anything, we should have been measuring everyone's vitamin D because it can lead to worse outcomes if you do get sick with the viral illness. So, but in my workup, I have 2 levels. So in my well woman level is where most people are coming in. I have another panel I'll do when someone has memory loss. So we do a little bit more extensive, is we're doing a full thyroid panel, and I'm looking for antibodies against the thyroid, and not just the TSH, but each individual marker. I'm looking for stress hormones, and those can be like cortisol in the morning. A lot of times I'll even do a salivary test looking for the stress hormones, because stress is a component of every single symptom and disease to some degree. And sometimes it takes showing a high level performer. I had a woman come in who was a business owner and wasn't recovering from exercise and intermittently would put on 5 to 10 pounds. And every time it was harder and harder to take off. She was visibly very fit, but she was pretty fatigued, and every exercise session left her down and out for a day or two. And we ran her cortisol, and it was through the roof at every single testing point throughout the day and right before bed. And it took really having her see that. So we look at cortisol, and it'll pull down all the other hormones. So you'll see one of the longevity hormones is DHEA. And so for women, you want to be over 150 with your DHEA. When you're hitting 40s and 50s, I have people really low. So it can contribute to this lack of vitality. And again, it's one piece. I'll look at other hormonal markers like pregnenolone, and very important for brain health. And then I do that full nutrient panel in everyone. And it's, you know, B12 and folate and CoQ10 and vitamin D and magnesium, and some of the essential ones, zinc and iodine and selenium. So zinc, iodine, and selenium and iron are all important for thyroid function. So it's just one of our hormones that we produce. So it's more than just our sex hormones, right? And then there is a phenomenon where you can have high copper. So it's based on the work of 2 people, really, but William Walsh is a PhD researcher. He is here in the town that we live in. And so I had my eyes set on years ago training with him back in 2013, 2014. And we happened to move to the town he lives in, which is Naperville. And I had the good fortune of training with him back in 2015 or 16 and utilize that. But you can have high copper. And for some people, that's going to make their brains inflamed. So think brain fog, or conversely, anxiety, panic, OCD. And in the children that this affects, you know, it's the hyperactivity. And so when you remedy that and balance that, there's nothing like it. It really alleviates symptoms. But as
This
you
is
know, Bonni,
interesting. Can I ask you
yeah,
about this? Because
yeah.
I understand, you know, especially, you know, since our recent major epidemic, that people are really overloading with zinc, which can definitely offset the balance with copper. So, any thoughts about the increased intake of zinc and this problem with copper, and where are we getting it from? Other than,
Yeah, great question. So Zinc, you're right. You want it in balance and in ratio to copper and about a 1-to-1 ratio in the body. However, I've been monitoring copper levels for the last decade with zinc. About 70 to 80% of the people I've tested have copper overload. And you're not just looking at the copper number, you're looking at how much is free and how much is not not bound by a protein called ceruloplasmin. So there's a calculation you do. For brain health, you want the free copper index under 30. It's part of Dr. Dale Bredesen's cognoscopy, so it's his evaluation for brain health. When it comes to mental health, lower to under 25 or even 15. And where it comes from, I look at 3 different areas. One, are you getting it from a source? So I had a woman who came in sky high levels. I said, are you cooking out of copper cookware or have a copper cup? So, I know people can go out and have a drink sometimes, and they make Moscow mules in these copper cups. And I was hoping she wasn't drinking those every day. And she said, no, a friend had given her a copper cup for health benefits, and it was skyrocketing her levels. And so
That's crazy.
yeah. And so cookware is another thing. Sometimes homes have copper water pipes. So then you really need to either filter your water. My avid swimmers, it can be an additive to the chlorine that they're putting in swimming pools, but most people don't have the exposure. Then you look at, there are some genetic variations in how copper is transported, et cetera. But more importantly, how we balance it is you look at antioxidant status. So think about the things that are antioxidants: vitamin E, vitamin C, selenium. And so it is restoring zinc, so it's in balance, and then it's ensuring the antioxidants are there. And typically it's pretty easy to get into balance. And you can get very fancy with the protocols. And I try to kind of be a minimalist and say, and people will say, oh, can I eat all of these things? I said, you're welcome to, and I give them ways to track their vitamins and minerals intake. And if they fall short, yeah, sure. You want to always have food first and supplements second. So it should be complementary.
And it's also hard to know. Just because something is on a label, it doesn't really indicate what's absorbed in your genetics. I mean, there's such an interplay. I mean, this is really complicated. But if it's okay, I'd like to go back to something you touched on, because I think this is a very, very important issue. And that is, when people get tested and they only get their TSH, and they will tell me they have hypothyroidism, but they've never had the other lab values done, like, of course, the T3, reverse T3, T4, and yes, the antibodies. Can you go into why this may be really important?
Yeah, so TSH is your one test, and it doesn't give you the complete picture. So it's like taking one puzzle piece out of the puzzle and saying, here, solve the, like we taking it out and then having someone solve the puzzle without that piece. So, but there's multiple pieces that the conventional doctors don't like. And in fact, sometimes it gets the traditional doctors a little incensed and inflamed if you talk about them, but there's value in knowing them, and I'll explain why. So your brain communicates to your thyroid gland, which sits here, by releasing thyroid stimulating hormone. The first thing your thyroid gland releases is free T4. That's like me giving you, Bonni, a paycheck if you're an employee. You can't do anything with the paycheck. It's not an active form of currency. You have to go to the bank and cash it. So your body converts that free T4 to free T3. That's your cash in hand. Okay, so that's your active hormone. That conversion requires all those vitamins and minerals I talked about: iodine, iron, selenium, and zinc. So if you're deficient, you can lower thyroid function. I had a young boy come in. He was only 7. Mom had Hashimoto's, and she says, I don't want him to develop it. He actually had antibodies at a low level at 7, and he looked like he was hypothyroid. It can pull it down by 75%, your function of your thyroid. So we replaced the zinc. Lo and behold, the antibodies normalized, and now normally functioning thyroid. That's early in the day. So that's why you really need to know. The things that will thwart that conversion is any stressor. So psychological stress, physical stress, even toxins as a stressor, because then the body says, oh my gosh, are we going through a famine? Do we need to preserve our energy? So it wants to slow everything down. And then it kicks everything out to reverse T3. That's the inactive thyroid hormone. That's like me saying, Bonni, I know I gave you that check, but we got to preserve our funds for our business. And I void that check. And I say, sorry, you can't cash it today or ever.
Yes. So
Yeah.
clearly having all this information to me, because having Hashimoto's, it can set you up, I know, for other autoimmune conditions, but it can be reversible if you get on it, especially early enough. But I think most doctors, for them, they just give the replacement, T4 typically, like the levothyroxine, or now I'm blanking on the other one. But, but we're not looking in the gut to see if it actually is able to convert. Because obviously another really important area to look at is if the gut is functioning properly, where the conversion happens.
Absolutely. I love you that you brought that up. And then, of course, we add the antibodies to finish off that last conversation, because low lying can suggest, hey, you're at risk of developing Hashis. It doesn't mean you will, but it says pay attention.
Sure.
And that leads to our second D, is digestion, or the microbiome. So we really want to optimize that. And we go through the key things. Are you chewing your food? Do you rest and digest? I always say rest to digest, chew to renew. So are you chewing your food and breaking it down till it's almost liquefied? And then I always say, eliminate to rejuvenate. And so you want to be going to the toilet, having bowel movements once a day. And I always laugh with my patients and say, this is the only time in life that talking about poop is sexy, because that means that you're gonna be faring far better than the next person who isn't, because that's how we detoxify. So you want to be going a minimum of 1 time per day. And I always ask my patients, do you know how you tell if your digestive system is working? And then they'll say, how? And I said, well, you turn around and look in the toilet. I said, again, it's not very glamorous, but you want to be pooping one long snake. So not pebbles, not loose stools. And it kind of is suggestive. Is your digestion working? And we have other things we test, and, we do fancier tests like the stool test. And
there's a lot of stool tests that look at the bacteria and all of that stuff, but yes, no, when I first got into this and people would start telling me about their bowel movements, I was like, huh? And now I realize, oh yes, this is my job. This is it is hugely indicative of what's going on, what comes out. I mean, let's face it. So now I would like to change the subject entirely, but I know this is a huge topic for people, that they come in constantly with relative to hormones, with mood swings, insomnia. And tell me about your connection and how you treat these people accordingly because of that.
So mood swings, insomnia, that kind of should be your tip off, especially a woman over 40. You're thinking, oh, there's a hormonal imbalance going on. And so when they come in, we'll, as swiftly as we can, we walk them through the 3Ds. And I always say, don't ever deny hormone boosting agents. So so you always do diet and supplements, and there's herbs. And then there has to be consideration. Do we actually need to introduce hormones at this point? Don't deny those. I can't tell you how many times I had a woman who did a similar process with another practitioner. 18 months in, she's still having one of the most common hormone imbalances, is having estrogen dominance, where the estrogen is higher in proportion to progesterone. And we'll go into why oral contraceptives do not fix this, and they make it worse. And so they'll come in with these symptoms, and I'm like, well, why didn't the other practitioner offer hormones at this point? Like, I wouldn't want to be suffering to this level. And a funny story is that, not funny, but the reality was, even back when I didn't know functional medicine, I had husbands bringing in their wives and say, I love her, but you have to just fix her. And the fix then is the wrong fix, which I'd love to shed light on, because I don't want anyone to ever be placed in that position. And sometimes practitioners aren't versed in prescribing, so they don't. And, the minute this patient, we went through all the pros and cons, made the decision to start bioidentical hormones to the degree she needed them, it was like day and night. So it really did solve all those things. But remember, hormones alone, she had already been optimized by another practitioner. Mostly, and we went in and rounded out anything that was missing. She responded beautifully and was like, wow, why didn't this happen sooner? I'm like, I don't know, but now you're on it. So enjoy. And it's day and night for a lot of women when you fix that estrogen dominance.
That is fantastic, but it makes me think I do have a burning question. Why is it that, gynecologists and conventional doctors have no problem giving out the synthetic birth control pills, but yet there seems to be a little queasy, uncomfortable, they're unfamiliar with doing any of the bioidentical hormones?
I think just not being trained. I mean, I didn't know. And, I was one of those shock horror physicians that gave out either birth control or Prozac. And so for your listeners, please know there's a better alternative. Your PMS is not a serotonin or Prozac deficiency. And in fact, there is some harm to be done if you're on Prozac for prolonged periods of time. You definitely don't, if you were already on it for more than, say, 3 to 6 months, you can't just stop it. You can feel worse. I've had people get suicidal that have stopped it. You don't want to do that. You want to politely say, no, thank you. That's not my issue. Or when it comes to birth control, I have a good friend that I take yoga with, and we are just chatting. She said, yeah, my doctor just put me on this birth control. So birth control, remember I said between 40 and 50, likely it's estrogen too high in proportion to progesterone. So now they give you birth control that does this. It gives you a lot of estrogen. So it's a lot of estrogen, a little bit of progesterone. So you've just made the whole problem worse. Or the only thing you've really solved was with birth control, you can regulate the bleeding, but you're not going to regulate the mood. And sadly, here's the downside to birth control is that it tanks your B vitamins. So that mood swing is going to get twofold worse. And it increases something called sex hormone binding globulin, which binds up all your testosterone, and then your libido tanks. And if you've ever worked with a woman who's been on birth control, myself included, it can take up to a year for those testosterone levels to return to normal and for you to get that libido back. That's a long time. So you don't want to be in the position of taking things that you don't need that don't correct the underlying imbalance. You want to be really switched on to that. That's not the way to go. And why do they do it? Because that's what we're trained. Those are the tools in our toolbox. And I'm just saying this. That's what we're given, and unless you seek a different.
They're not afraid of those, even though when you look at the breakdown in the body, because I just went to a lecture on this, it really affects so many more parts than the bioidentical. Like it's actually much more aggressive, ironically. But there's this perception because it's been, approved by the FDA, I guess, I'm not sure, that it's safer. It's kind of crazy. But another thing that during just now you were talking about, all of the hormones, I think about women and concerned with their weight and as they're going into this phase of life. So the first thing they think about is cutting out fat and that relationship with the hormones and all of this. And I'm sure you have an opinion on all of this as well.
Absolutely. So, very rarely will I have someone cut out fat. Fat fuels the brain. So if you're having memory issues, the quickest way to solve them is to eat a little more fat or trend towards ketosis. So it is a preferred fuel. And the more carbs you eat, unfortunately, you're going to become what we call metabolically inflexible. That means that you're going to rely on carbohydrates, which have a quick on and a quick off. And as the blood sugar is dropping, it makes you crave more carbs, you release more insulin, and over time that insulin doesn't work. And insulin resistance, when that happens, so that's an insulin, in my humble opinion, over 5 or 6 fasting in the morning, it makes it harder and harder and harder to lose weight. So 2 things adding, besides fueling the brain, I talk about a balanced plate. So eating things in balance. So you want a serving of fat at every meal. And it will balance that blood sugar rise. So let me give you an example. So we will oftentimes put continuous glucose monitors in our patients so they can monitor and track what's driving the blood sugar. And a lot of people are big fans of oatmeal for breakfast. And I say, depends on what you balance it with. Not a fan of it alone. And we did an experiment with the patient and said, all right, let's have that oatmeal with some almonds. And blood sugar still went up. Let's have it add a little collagen protein, still went up. And then we said, add a half of avocado, and that blunted the rise of the blood sugar by balancing the carbs with the fats. But I like to see them, all 3 of them, proteins, carbs, and fats. And I always say prioritize and pack in that protein first, probably followed up with the fat. And then I always say fill up with fiber. So eat those veggies. And if you're eating that way, then ironically, over time, you're going to feel full. A lot of people, when they start eating the way we prescribe, they're like, wow, this is so much food. I don't even think I can get it all in a day.
Yeah, I think when people eat what the body actually requires to function properly, it is incredible that they all of a sudden, don't have the cravings, appetite, and this whole idea of counting calories is like out the window. I
Yeah.
mean, when you realize that. So, okay, well, I would love to talk now a little bit more just the whole topic of anti-aging, and because it is a hot topic, and clearly, we live in a world of information overload,
Mhm.
which can be just confusing. I mean, particularly one example is protein. For so long, low protein. Now we know we need protein, and then the muscle. Anyway, so what is your thought on this whole topic?
On aging in general, I always say anti-aging should begin probably the day you're born, and hopefully your parents are doing a good job. But screening tests 20 onward, and I always big proponent of 3 levels. I always say it depends on it's kind of like do you want a used car that might break down? Do you want a new car? What level? And all that. And I say you always want to prioritize the diet and lifestyle. And you can look at the blue zones, and there are traits they found in people who live long and live well and have the highest number of people over 100. So that's what the blue zones are. And you definitely, and it was funny, I used to do Medicare physicals. So before I decided about launching my practice, we moved to this new state, kind of was deciding what to do. And I was doing these Medicare physicals and met the loveliest couples. And I found that the couples that I would see and evaluate that seemed to do better had all of those blue zone qualities. So they had a community. Maybe it was usually spiritual. They had family close by. They had their spouse. They all belonged to silver sneakers, so they were all moving, and it's really movement throughout the day. And then the difference from in the patients that I saw, they were eating whole foods. So they'd heard on the news and they were eating more vegetables. And they had implemented gentle supplementation because, again, they watched the news, they read the news, and they had piecemealed together a thing. So it was really hands down what I saw in the clients who we did a get up and go test. How quickly can you stand up and walk a certain amount of feet and turn around and come back? And that's a get up and go test. And the people that were spry and even their brains were sharper were following the blue zones. But I'd say you need to probably take it a step further. And I look at my top 3 anti-aging strategy. Do you want to know what they are?
Yes.
Okay, so they focus around the top 3 things that cause it. And I always say stress, so it's tied with sleep,
Mm.
it's toxic exposures, and it's food. Too much, too often, and not the right kind. So we can unpack each of those a little bit if you'd like, if you have one you want me to start with.
Sure. Well, I guess go with the food. Start with
Okay,
that.
food, yeah. And so, the longevity studies really centered around they follow people where they reduce caloric intake. And it was really only about 11% over a period of time. And they found they did better and they live longer, they live better, et cetera. But I take it one step further and I talk about and introduce the concept of intermittent fasting. And I'm sure your audience is well versed because I'm sure that's one thing you talk about. And I always say, all adults at a minimum should be eating only in a 12-hour window, 2 to 3 meals at a maximum time frame. So 7 a to 7 p.m., 8 to 8, whatever your window is, and preferably not too close to bed. But then I'd say to get the most benefits of anti-aging is introduce a longer fast periodically. So 3 to 5 days. So it really takes several days of not eating. And we'll talk about there are methods that make this easier. So it doesn't have to be daunting. And I'm like, maybe the first thing your audience does is they dip their toe in and they skip dinner. They eat dinner one night and they don't eat again until the next night at dinner. That's a 24-hour fast. You can fill up on all kinds of herbal teas, water, just no food. But you really get the benefit beyond 3 days. So I do a diet where I'll fast for 5 days and I use a commercially available product that helps. So if you really wanted to kind of dip in, and I was able to test how quickly I age, and that's something called pace of aging. And my husband and I measured ours side by side, and we are at the same level. So we're aging slightly slower
Is
than
this
one
one of
year.
the clocks or is this another test?
Yeah, it's one of the
There's a bunch
clocks.
of clocks out there, just, that actually we can now measure not just your chronological age on the day you were born, but rather your biological age. So then we can start to see that some of these interventions are actually making a difference, which of course I think is very exciting because often we don't know there's an issue until it's way too late.
Yep, absolutely. So it is. And I would say there's so many of them. And for the purposes of this call, we're going to maybe just talk about two of the parameters. But yeah, the measurement is called pace of aging. There are several companies that do it. It's how quickly you age. And you really want to be aging less than 1 year per 1 year. So my husband and I were both at 0.9 initially, and this is last January. We're due to have a repeat here. And he's a pretty lean guy, and I'm kind of like, I'm going to experiment with this fast because I didn't want him losing more weight. You'll lose a little bit of weight with the two. It's a nice jump start. Everyone feels mentally clearer by the end of it. It's just simply amazing. I did ultimately have my husband do them as well, and he's like, wow. For him, it was a little bit tougher the first couple of days, but he was like, wow, I feel so amazing. And I always say it's a great way to double your energy. And so I did a series of fast, 5 days a month for 3 months. And at the end of it, we remeasured our pace of aging. And my husband, we had done other strategies. So I have a lot of anti-aging strategies. We're always our own guinea pigs, right? And so he had dropped from 0.9 to 0.84. So by 0.06. So that's a pretty good drop. I dropped
all the years, I mean, if you times that by 30 years, it starts to mean something, right?
absolutely. So I dropped by 0.18, 3 times as much just by introducing them. 3 times as much. So that means I always
Wow,
joke and I say,
wow, that's amazing. So you didn't mention it, but one of the big topics, that everyone talks about with the eating and aging is the topic of mTOR.
yeah. And so, mTOR, think of it as it regulates the building blocks. So you want to be, you want to be building muscle at certain times, but then you also want to do house cleaning, and you can't kind of do those simultaneously. So they're two different processes. And by house cleaning, I talk about autophagy. So that's a fancy term for cleaning your cellular house. And I always say, think about your regular house. If it was so cluttered and you had stuff all over the floor, you'd probably trip while trying, and you probably couldn't find things. So you're not as efficient. It's the same thing that happens with a cell. And if it gets so backlogged with this cellular debris, then that cell can change into what we call a zombie cell or senescent cell. And those are cells that are non-functional, and then they'll recruit healthy cells to become just like them. That's why they have nicknamed them zombie cells. And just by
I
long,
heard this is
yeah.
the cause of gray hair, by the way. Have you ever noticed when you get gray hair and there's a sprout that grows up next to them? It has to do with those senescent cells. They make friends.
I have a whole genetic thing on that, but we'll have to do a second call. I'll talk to you. There's some genetics behind graying too, besides stress. But yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
really? Yes, I would love to hear that.
yeah. And so that I'm not a big proponent of when you're fasting of where you're going to be, lifting weights and trying to build muscles simultaneously. You kind of have to have that break and gentle movement, of course, but always gentle movement at the very least, right? Walking your steps or yoga or Tai Chi, etc. So yeah. How about you? Anything else you'd add to that? There's like so much controversy and people look at it. They look
Yeah,
at it.
no, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think the mTOR, I mean, to me, just thinking about protein specifically and the conversation of it triggering mTOR, well, so does carbohydrates too. But so the whole idea is eating and then not eating. I
Yeah.
mean, basically going back to your original concept, which I think this is a fantastic tagline you should use, about eat it, well, I don't know what it was, eating to renew and then rest and renew, but basically the idea is that's what it is. We were meant for feast and famine, and unfortunately the way, we have food availability in our culture, we've gone to eating 15 hours a day every 3 hours.
Mm-hmm.
So to me, 12 hours is like, it's nothing. I think more and more stuff is going to emerge,
Mm-hmm.
obviously, with the whole aging topic, but I think that is a great one. So now I'm going to turn over to another question. Just some maybe the most common misconceptions or also uncomfortable things that women might come in to see you about, that they're embarrassed about talking about, and basically why it maybe, I like to say common, but doesn't mean it's normal.
Yeah, so several. We'll talk about the common that aren't normal, and then we'll talk about the ones that are maybe a little more uncomfortable. So there are kind of two categories.
Okay,
So
sure.
common are things that they feel fatigued, or they have a little bit, they're forgetting, or they don't have the recovery they did, putting on the weight, and they're dismissed as normal. Worse, in the worst case scenario, they're offered Prozac. Like I said, that's like such a common fix. Like maybe you're depressed, and that's how we were trained. So those are the things I'm going to ask your audience to ask that question. Like, never accept that this is a normal part of aging. At 55, I feel much better than I did in my 20s because I now know how to live in balance. And we all do this, right? But I've built up resilience over the last decade. And, I don't seek not sleeping, but say there's some kind of hiccup up and, a kid gets sick, the dog's whining, or whatever it is, I get less sleep, then I'm not so taken out. I have more resilience for the next day. Now, you don't want to be sleep deprived all the time. So you have those symptoms. So ask yourselves, if I'm feeling this way, I'm told that it's normal. Please don't accept that. Seek a different answer and a different approach, preferably a functional medicine one. And then the second thing I'm going to have everyone think about. So as you're driving, or maybe you're doing some housework, I always like listening to podcasts while I'm doing like work, because then I'm busying my body and then listening with my brain. And two birds with one stone, right? Is, do you have the same energy you had when you're in your teens or 20s? And if you don't, then you're definitely acclimated. So many people acclimate to that lower level of energy that they're not even aware. And then all of a sudden, like 30% of our population is very, very sick. They come in almost disabled or very debilitated from symptoms for years, if not decades. And it didn't happen overnight. This was a gradual thing that you've accepted as your norm. So if you don't have that level of energy, seek someone that can determine why. And then the uncomfortable symptoms. So we're going to talk about libido and vaginal dryness. So a lot of women don't want to talk about those things, but I'll never forget, I was in early on in private practice, and, when you're trained for so long, it left little time for social life, and I'd moved states, and I had the cutest couple come in, and the woman she was into her 70s, and they were evaluating her for her chest pain to see if it was a heart attack. And I said, well, what kind of exertional activity do you do? Do you do any exercise? And she giggles. And I'm like, what? And then she had remarried. Both her new husband's spouses, both of their spouses had died, and they were never more in love, they said, than ever. And of course, she was alluding to the exertion she got was by having sex with her new husband. It was so sweet. And I thought we should all be having sex into our 70s and 80s and enjoying it. And sometimes there's that lack of desire, and it's multifactorial. There's so many components. And, I pull out all stops, so there's everything from decreasing cortisol, so that you're not in a stress state, balancing the hormones. There's even an FDA approved peptide for hypoarousal disorder. That's what they've given the diagnosis of, if you want a diagnosis for low libido. Do you know what that peptide is?
Yeah, sure. What is it?
It's oxytocin. And so oxytocin is naturally produced when we deliver a baby. It's naturally released after we have sex. And it is FDA approved. Peptides are simply breakdown products of protein. I use them in my practice. We don't make any claims about them. That one is FDA approved. So clearly it works. And it's you can get it in a nasal spray or even a troche that melts in your mouth. But I much prefer the nasal spray. It's such a quick on, quick off. Great for bone health. So for people who don't want to be on hormones or afraid of them, which I hope they're not. I hope they have that serious conversation we talked about. But yeah, it's approved. And like I said, we produce 7,000 peptides in our body naturally. Insulin is a peptide. And as opposed to medication, it goes into the cell and it works immediately. It's a quick on and a, it's a quick on. So you're not taking weeks and weeks and months. It could be a handful of days before you notice benefits. So yeah, it's something for your listeners to think about if that's afflicting them. So you want to really take
Yeah,
care of
I
that.
think this is actually huge because, well, we're the same age, and I'm gonna say that I would say all but maybe one or two of my friends are still sexually active. And so it seems like it's almost like a normal thing. I mean that they're accepting it as being that it's more unusual for people to continue. I mean, I don't know what the numbers are on a national level. And again, like you said, there's no question that part of this is emotional, but the other part is certainly the hormones, chemicals, and all of that. But to me, it's something we should not give up on yet. If
Absolutely.
you,
Yeah, and if it's a desire issue, we can definitely just walk them through the process, offer them here's step one, step two, step three. And I always say that, I always lay the foundation. That's my 3D protocol. I have a higher level kind of way to work with me where I say it's leveraging your genetics, which we've only kind of dipped into a little bit. And then
yes.
and then I have the living longer, living stronger. And so that's the complete anti-aging. It's like, everyone deserves and warrants at least laying the foundation. And if you don't get all the benefits, you move on up and through the process. But yeah, have that conversation. And then if it's, vaginal dryness, there's lots of things we can do from topical creams that aren't full-blown estrogen, progesterone. DHEA cream goes a long way.
They
I think
don't have to live like this. There are answers. Well, I would love to have you back just to talk about the peptides right there. That is like a whole discussion that is so hot right now. But I think all of these issues are connected. So I have two final questions for you today. And one is if you just give one tidbit of advice as far as just generally, the mood swings, the unwanted belly fat, the insomnia, what would it be?
what's the quickest? I'm trying to think of what is the quickest route to get them.
Well, one thing they could take, one step that would be foundational, perhaps.
I'd say eat a balanced plate.
Mm.
Eat that balanced plate because blood sugars really drive insulin, really drive the imbalance in hormones because insulin will also increase something called SHBG. So it's going to bind up your hormones. And you don't want your testosterone going low just because you're not eating. And by that means a balance of half a plate of veggies, eating that at least 100 grams of protein per day, and then having a good serving of fat. So I always say, pack in the protein, fuel with fat, and fill up with fiber. Those are your veggies. So if you can remember those three things, do that as a starting point, and anyone can implement that overnight.
Wonderful, great. So now my final question, because this is something I'm just personally passionate about, but I do think it is a sticking point. And this is dining out and when you travel, and we just cannot avoid. And as you discussed earlier to me, that importance of social networking and connection is so important. So I'd like to know what you do when you go to a restaurant.
Yeah, that's a great question. So, what's funny? We do go out and, but it feels like more and more locally here. We just cook so much better at home and we have fresher ingredients. So it seems like it's got a little less, but say we're traveling and you have to go out. So I'm always looking for what's that protein meal that I can buy. So is it a good piece of steak? Is it fish? Is it some organic chicken? And, we always look for farm to table restaurants. And then, and you can even, there's more fast food type places that like a lot of the bowl places will be fresher. So we have a place called Sweet Greens here where it's fresh
That's a
bowls,
chain. Yeah,
salads.
I've heard of
Yeah,
it. Mhm.
it's chain, but and you can get extra virgin olive oil. In fact, I have a salad coming
Oh,
for lunch today.
oh,
So I was
perfect.
ordered it. Yeah, I know, isn't that great? And you can do 2 servings of protein. And then ask for that side of veggies. Probably the worst is if and I always say if you're going to go out and you're going to be a place that doesn't have is not going to have that balance, is eat what you're not going to get at home first. Like say it's a place you didn't choose,
Yeah.
and you're meeting friends out or whatever. Hopefully your friends won't want to go there. But my husband likes pubs. He calls them pubs, and we'll never ever go back to this place. Like it was just like the worst food ever. And
Oh, God. We won't
absolutely
mention the name right now.
no, they had absolutely zero vegetables, minus like leaf lettuce you could order. And I kind of knew this in advance, and I was eating that balanced plate. So I got some things in beforehand, but I'm like, oh, that set me back days, honey. No, I'm teasing. And then if you're traveling, just general travel, as I always say, the hardest thing to get is great veggies. So I order stuff. Most hotel rooms, you're going to have a little fridge. So I'm getting organic carrots or small baby bell peppers, and then fruit is so hard to get when you're traveling unless you're going to somewhere tropical. It's not on the menu. You might get it for breakfast, but you're definitely not going to see it for lunch and for dinner. And so you can even pack whole oranges and apples in your bags, but truthfully it's just so easy to order a small delivery of things to your room on arrival. Before, when I traveled, I would get my Uber. I'd, request 2 stops, and I'd go to the closest market, stock up. And so that I wasn't seeking the food.
Well, that is a great idea. Well, listen, thank you so much. You've given us so much, but for those of you who want to know more, of course, I am going to put in the description notes all of your contact information for people to go to your website and look at your programs that you offer. But then please, everyone, check it out. Energized. Yes, fantastic forever. I love it. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Bonni. It's been a pleasure.